to the Web3 Prof Podcast.
All right, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am here with Will Casarin, who is the founder of Damus. Thanks for being with me here today, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Did I say your name right?
Yes.
Okay, good. We're off to a good start. Will, you've been in the crypto space for a while. The early days, I'd love to hear about how you got into Bitcoin and what was the initial urge or interest that got you into the space.
Yeah, I mean, I found Bitcoin, I think it was a Hacker News post in like 2010. I think it was around that time. And I'm like, oh, this seems cool. You know, you can send, money over the internet. You haven't been able to do that before. Yeah, you could before with like PayPal, but
yeah,
this was kind of a new approach where it didn't have any central authority that was kind of governing it. Because there's been issues with PayPal and other payment providers where they can just freeze your account. So it's always been really interesting. It's like, wow, what if we can just send value without, anyone in control? But at the time I think it was like 30 cents when I first got into Bitcoin. And it was just kind of like a toy. Like obviously no one valued it because it wasn't worth anything.
Yeah.
And then, when it went from 30 cents to $1, I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. It went to $1. And then it went from $1 to $30. I'm like, whoa, maybe I should have bought it more at $1.
Were you holding Bitcoin at that time for investment purposes, or were you just playing around with it?
No, it was I was giving it away. I would like give a Bitcoin to all my friends and like, here's a Bitcoin. I kind of regret that now because everyone I ever gave that Bitcoin to, they've lost it by now. But, but yeah, I've never used it as like an investment vehicle or anything. I wasn't really into investing or anything like that.
Yeah. It's
mostly I just love the technology. So I could legitimately say I was in it for the technology, even though it's become somewhat of a meme now. But yeah, so once it started, then it went from like $30 to like $100. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need to start like, why do people value this? It was kind of confusing to me. I thought it was just a toy. And then I just went down that whole rabbit hole of what is money. And you're like, wow. And then you realize like so much of people just assume that our money has value, but you can't just take that at face value, right?
Was that an interest to you in the early days? Were you thinking, oh, I don't know if I trust the government or I don't know if I care about fiat, or was it more just like, hey, I'm into computers and this is cool computer stuff?
Yeah, I wasn't like a crazy libertarian. I feel like I'm slowly becoming more crazy libertarian since Bitcoin, but in the early days, I was pretty much just a computer nerd who liked the technology.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of people get in from the opposite approach where they like the money aspect and sound money, and then they find Bitcoin and they're not technologists, and that's why they like Bitcoin. But I came in from the tech side. I liked it just because it was technologically very, very interesting to me. So.
Wow. And so were you doing that as a job at that time? Were you building on Bitcoin as a career?
People who are building on Bitcoin in like 2010, 2013 are like crazy. It was like, it was wild times, and people who had the balls to do that at that time was very impressed me. But no, I was not working or building on Bitcoin, but I was trying to integrate Bitcoin into a lot of the places I was working at. So around that time I was working at this record label called Monstercat. And we were one of the first record labels in Vancouver or in the world that were selling our music with Bitcoin, which was pretty cool. This was in 2013. And then 2014, 2015, the price started going up more and more. And I sent out an email to about 600 of our artists. And I was like, do you want to be paid in Bitcoin? Because this is actually like cheaper for us transaction wise to make a Bitcoin transaction than to make a large PayPal transaction. And almost everyone said no. It's just like that's a scam. It's like, yeah. But I'm pretty sure if they said yes at that point in time, they would all be like multimillionaires, all of artists. But I'm just saying, just like throw that out there.
Yeah, just sort of no judgment, just saying I was right.
Well, it is what it is. But yeah, and then so then I realized that wow, we can actually start to integrate this technology into more aspects of everything, of like selling things in general. So that's once the Lightning came out in 2016, the Lightning Network, I started working on that full time. I quit my job at Monstercat randomly to my partner's dismay. She was in Mexico, like at partying, and I like randomly quit my job, and she came back. She's like, "Why, you don't have a job?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm working on this new thing called Lightning." And she's like, "What are you talking about? It's like you're speaking nonsense."
Yeah.
So that was, I tried to build some Lightning startups, but I realized that it's just way too early. No one was ready for it yet. Mm-hmm. And I realized, I need to get more people excited about Lightning. How do I do that? I'm like, well, what if we integrate it into a social network? And that's eventually what came to Damus, is because I'm just trying to get more and more people exposed to this technology, because I think it's so cool.
Right. And when you were working in, or playing around with Bitcoin in the early days, what was Bitcoin like in Vancouver, specifically here? Or I'm assuming you were here.
Yeah.
So were you the only guy, or was there a big community? What was it like?
There was probably like one of the very early Bitcoin communities that was ever anywhere in the world, really. I think we had the first Bitcoin ATM in Vancouver. I remember going to a Bitcoin meetup at like, I think it must have been early, like 2013 or 2014 or something. And then this is where I met this guy named Riku, who was another Bitcoiner who was here in Vancouver. I ended up hiring him at Monstercat, and he was teaching me all this stuff about sound money and libertarianism. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. But yeah, there was a decent group of people in Vancouver talking about Bitcoin at that time. So
were you working in Decontrol? Was that a thing at that time?
No, yeah, Decontrol. I've never been there, but it seems mostly they're exploring like kind of the more of the non-Bitcoin crypto stuff, and I've always just focused really on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't remember it at the time, but it might have been.
So can you lay a foundation of like, so what is Nostr, and explain that to us, and what does that have to do with Bitcoin, if anything?
Yeah, so it's counterintuitive. Like a lot of people suspect that Nostr is built on Bitcoin or something like that, but actually Nostr is a completely different protocol. It's a standard. It's just a new protocol, like in the same sense of like email is a protocol, the web is a protocol. But it's a protocol for social networking and more. So it's a way to build censorship-resistant social networks that are controlled by the people who are in the network, not like some central institution. So a big issue right now on Twitter and Facebook is that they can unilaterally just remove you from the internet, remove your existence, destroy your social graph. So like all the followers you built up over time, like they can just snap their fingers and deperson you from the internet.
Yes.
So, Nostr was this first attempt to say like, no one should be allowed to do that. If you want to build up a social following online, then no one should be able to, can just remove you from that. And that's pretty important because a lot of people nowadays, they build their business on top of their social, right?
Of course.
I've heard so many stories where I built my business on YouTube and then YouTube took me down and now I'm screwed. It's like, why that shouldn't even be possible. Like that's not really fair. That's why people like run a website and sell their stuff through websites because they have a little bit more autonomy on their own website. So Nostr gives you that for your social sphere.
So who is Nostr been built by a company or just a group of programmers? How does this happen?
It just started with a markdown document made by this anonymous developer called Fiat Jeff. No one knows who he is. It's very similar to Satoshi.
Okay.
He's still alive. He's around and he's still interacting with the protocol, but some Brazilian guy we don't really know. We don't know his name or anything.
Yeah.
He just put up this markdown document, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I just read it in an afternoon. I'm like, oh, this is simple enough. Built a client on a weekend and just realized how simple it is to build on this thing and just build to get a working client. So I think that's why it's kind of taken off recently. It's built by a community of developers. Like there's probably thousands of developers working on this now. But yeah, it's just all. It's kind of like the Linux operating system. There's lots of people working on it, but not necessarily like one company directing it or anything.
Yeah, and so you saw kind of, I guess, the writing on the wall. There's an opportunity here to build something on Nostr, to build some kind of social media thing that you might be able to get traction with. And that's where Damus came from?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, Nostr initially marketed itself as a censorship resistant social network, a way to build one of those. So naturally that was the first application that I attempted to build. And that's what Damus was. So Damus is a Nostr client for iOS. And it's just a way, it's very similar to Twitter and you can use it like Twitter, but no one can deplatform you, which is really important. But the reason why I mentioned it was like, that was one of the first use cases is that you can actually build other things on Nostr. You don't have to build a social network. You can build other tools. Someone built something similar to Substack where it's like long form articles. And it all works the same way. It's like, if you want to write those articles and not be deplatformed, you can do that. So it's more of like a information dissemination protocol.
And how did you get traction on iOS? Because that seems to be a bit of a challenge for some organizations.
Oh, it's the worst. I hate interacting with Apple in every step because they're very, they try to maintain a really high quality app store, and that's why they're very, very strict on what you're allowed to put on it. So yeah, I was initially very surprised that I even got on the App Store because...
when you got on the App Store, it was a big deal. Like I remember, is it maybe a year ago? Is that about right?
Yeah, it's February of this year.
Okay, so yeah, less than a year ago. And when you were successful with that was big news, especially in the community of people who care about censorship resistant communication.
Yeah, because a lot of people thought it wouldn't even be possible just due to the nature of the application, in the sense that, there's a lot of rules on Apple Store saying like, well, you need to be able to like remove someone's account if they're being bad and they have to follow your terms of service. But just due to the nature of this protocol, I don't have the ability to censor people. I don't have the ability to remove people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was initially surprised they even allowed it, and maybe they won't in the future, but for now it's allowed.
So what happens then? What if Damus gets deplatformed?
Yeah, so there's these certain choke points where you can kind of cut off people from Nostr. So obviously iOS users, if Apple decides that Nostr clients are not permitted, then Apple users won't be able to use them. But you can still use it on a desktop. You can still use it on Android.
I see.
And all the people on all those other platforms can still interact with each other. So that's the really cool thing about this, is that you can build many different clients, and it's all the same shared data, so everyone can still interact. So even if you get deplatformed from iOS, you can still open up your Android phone, reconnect to your social graph, and you're still good to go. All the data is not on the device, it's on the network. So.
And what if Damus becomes kind of the old thing and somebody creates a new social network on Nostr? Can I take my following and transfer it over?
Yes. Yeah. So if someone builds a better social client than Damus, which some people are working on, like Primal's a really good one, probably my main competitor, we're all friends. But yeah, they provide a different experience. They provide different algorithms. And so if you've been using Damus for a year and you want to go try Primal, you can just put your key in Primal and all your stuff's still there. So.
And one of the major challenges, of course, with any social network is you got to have this kind of mass adoption, or else, if few people are using it, it's not so fun. It has this positive network externality perspective that we need to understand. So how are you building kind of a user base when it's like this new social platform?
Yeah, so I think this is where Nostr has a pretty unique advantage to actually potentially be able to compete with the larger big tech companies, because why would anyone want to start up with a new app and build a new social graph on this new application? Well, people don't want to do that in a standard like scenario, because there's a chance where that platform will go away and it was like all a waste of time. But this is a new idea where once you join, your stuff is just there forever. In some sense, you can always back up all of your posts you've ever done. You can always back up your social graph. So it's like, well, if I invest my time into this network, maybe I'll have more long-term returns because I know I'll never get deplatformed, and I can build a following. Yeah. So maybe there's not many people right now, but it's more stable over time.
Yeah.
And once more and more people start realizing this, and once more and more people start building new experiences, like if maybe there's an Instagram, there's a TikTok, there's a Substack, and all of these things work together. Now you're building it's steamrolling like more and more and more. So this is where I think where the network effects might actually like steamroll in that sense.
What do you say to the people who are like, well, we need censorship because what about child pornography, or what about all the bad things in the world that we need to get control of? Or, maybe even not the things that are as bad as child pornography, but what about just people who are just a little bit racist? Like, shouldn't they be deplatformed? What do you say to that?
Yeah. So I think people are thinking about this entirely wrong. I think moderation is good, but centralized moderation is bad. So this idea where you have one trust and safety team at Twitter, and they decide what is true and what's false, and they decide what's allowed and what's not allowed. It's the world doesn't really work like that. Like what, some country might think it's allowed and some country might think it's not allowed. It's actually like subjective in lots of different parts of the world. So on a decentralized network, you can actually start building different moderation schemes and different moderation approaches, and then you can subscribe to the approaches that you like, that fits for you. And it creates more of a free market of moderation versus having this like top down moderation, which is, I feel like it's just doesn't fit the world, doesn't fit like, anyway. So
can you, so that's interesting. I've never heard this before. Can you give us some examples on how that would play out?
Yeah. I mean, so for instance, right now, if you join Nostr, it's kind of like the Wild West. There's not much moderation at all. So people who like that, it's like great. It's like extreme free speech. You hear everything. Yeah. And then you also see the horrible stuff you don't want to see, right? That a lot of people wouldn't want to see. So you can imagine a situation where there's algorithms that, can learn that you don't like certain things. Like you don't want to see porn in your feed. Yeah. So then the algorithm on your phone will just like automatically censor that from your feed. But that's a choice that you're making, either via the client you choose that's providing those features, or maybe it's a relay that's providing that filtering. So you can join certain relays that fit your moderation styles.
Okay. And is this, like, you use terms like relays and things like that? These are technical terms that I don't think most people can really relate to.
Right.
Can or is Damus set up in a way that kind of the common person could set these types of controls up?
Yeah, it all comes down to like the design of the app. You got to make it as simple as possible so that it's intuitive for regular people, because there are new concepts inside this protocol that that just don't exist in the centralized space. Like no one has to think about setting their relays in Twitter because there's only one relay. It's Twitter.
Yeah.
But in Nostr, you can have 10 different relays, which in a relay in Nostr are just different servers that you send the notes to, and that's what gives it its censorship resistance. So if one of those relays wants to censor me, they can take it down from their server, but it's still on 9 of the other 10 relays. So when I say relays, this is just what I'm referring to as all the servers, which gives Nostr its censorship resistant properties.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is confusing. We've noticed this is confusing for our users, and they're like, which relays do I choose? Like what? And then it gets confusing. So we're thinking maybe we'll just hide that for the most part and have some type of autopilot that does it for you. But for people who really want to configure it and can connect to their own relays, they can do so. So.
Wow. And do you have some type of monetization mechanism? How are you affording to do this really amazing undertaking?
Well, we're supported right now by grants. So Jack Dorsey's been a huge supporter of the protocol. He right when he joined Nostr, he was like, "Oh, this reminds me of what Twitter was like at 5,000 users, but better." So that was a huge boost to the network after he said that.
I mean, there's not a bigger guy that you could try to get on board, could you? That's incredible. Was that just like, did that just happen? Like, did somebody call him and be like, "Hey man, like you got to check this out"? Somebody know him?
So Jack was looking into funding like decentralized protocols on Twitter. So he asked a question on Twitter. He's like, "Hey, which other project should I fund?" And since there's so many Bitcoiners in who follow him, and he's a Bitcoiner, everyone started saying fund Nostr, like, and they started giving him links to Damus. And then one day randomly Jack messaged me. He DM'd me on Twitter. He's like, "How do I fund you guys?" I'm like, he's like, do you guys have a foundation? I'm like, "No, we're just a markdown document on GitHub." He's like, "Okay, let me figure it out." And then he's just like, he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna send you guys money." And he's just sent like 15 Bitcoin to Fiat Jaff. I'm like, "Okay." And then he ended up sending more to me later. And then he's just a huge supporter, and he just wants to see it succeed as well. So that helps, but that's only going to work for a short time. So we need to think about how to make this sustainable over a long time, which is why I've been integrating Bitcoin into the app, because obviously I have the history of Bitcoin. I worked on Lightning, so it made sense to integrate like Lightning into it. Because I've always liked the idea of instead of having a like button, maybe you have like a button where you can click and send Bitcoin to people. So Damus has that now. So one feature we had in the early days was it was an optional thing you can turn on, which it says you can send a proportion of the ZAP. We call them ZAPs, micro Bitcoin transactions. You can send a proportion of the ZAP to Damus to support the development. Unfortunately, Apple forced us to remove that feature, so now it's forced us. So they're making it really hard for us to do this sustainably. They really want us to use the Apple Pay feature, which I'm like, right. I can't.
Obviously, that's against what you believe.
Yeah, it's just like, it also, I don't know, because it's just Bitcoin's way cooler. Like, why don't we just use Bitcoin for these things? Because it's so much easier. Right?
Yeah.
But obviously, when you're on Apple, you got to play by the rules. So that's why I'm building an Android version.
And do you think you'll have more success with Android?
I think so. The Android market is a much larger market overall. So that might be interesting to try to reach more people. So I don't know if it'll be more successful than the iOS version, but I think it's important to have it.
How many people do you have working for you?
So with the OpenSats grant from Jack, I was able to hire one developer. So he's another Vancouver local he's really good. He's helping on the iOS side, but it's just me and him so far.
Are you kidding?
No.
Is it two of you?
It was mostly just me for until a couple of months ago. So it's nice to at least have some help now. So.
Oh my gosh. That is remarkable. Okay, so what does the future of Damus look like? What are the next? You've kind of referenced a couple features that you're hoping to move into. Where are you guys moving next? What's the next step?
Yeah, I mean, so social networking is it's one cool use case, but the real promise of this protocol is going to be showing the interconnectedness of all these different applications working together. So once we have more applications such as like Instagram and TikTok, I want to build more productivity tools. Like think of like Slack or Outlook or all these tools that you use for business. Maybe these could all be rebuilt on Nostr. So I feel like that'd be pretty interesting if there's like a Damus suite, because I kind of want that for myself. And just to show the power that it's not just social media. This thing is a very generic protocol for information dissemination. So,
that's amazing. And as you continue to build Damus, do you see competition with like Lens protocol or other protocols that are built on Ethereum or other, I guess, blockchains as competition to you, or how do you view that?
Not so much the other blockchain ones like Lens or Farcaster, just because, I don't think it's a good idea to build them on blockchains, because blockchains are really only meant for transferring money. It's a really inefficient database for everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But we're starting to see some really interesting integrations with ActivityPub. So, Facebook's Threads, right, or the Instagram Threads, they're about to switch over to be building on ActivityPub, which is like another protocol that's competing with Nostr. And someone on Nostr named Alex Gleason, he built a bridge from ActivityPub to Nostr. So now, in theory, Threads we'll be able to talk to people on Threads with Nostr. So you'll be able to open up Damus and talk to people on Threads. And this is going to a much larger vision of these protocols, which is, once we have all these bridges, we can actually all talk together. It doesn't matter if they're using Farcast or Lens or Threads. We can all still talk to each other because it's all decentralized protocols that just are bridged to each other. So
wow.
That's definitely a future I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, amazing. What type of people are currently using Damus?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The early days it was mostly a lot of Bitcoiners, just because the protocol was built by a Bitcoiner, and I built the first popular client. I'm a Bitcoiner, so we have a lot of Bitcoin integration.
Jeff Booth was really pushing this hard in when you guys launched, and I think still is an active user for you.
Yeah, Jeff's been probably one of the more active users on the network, so he's a huge believer. So it's cool to have, so just a lot of Bitcoiners like him. But we want it to be for everyone. We find there's a lot of people on the network who just haven't really been on social media just because they didn't feel like it was right for them, or they didn't feel like being just like cattle for big tech.
Yeah.
So, they feel like this is the first time they feel like they could actually use social media because it's like a freer version of what currently exists. So people like that. Yeah.
And one thing that like you said in the beginning, there seems to be some confusion that Damus is built on Bitcoin. So what is the draw with the Bitcoiners and Damus? Why do you see that there's such a connection there, especially in the early time?
Yeah, probably because I added Zaps. So Zaps was the spec I added to Nostr, which allows you to send Bitcoin via Lightning to people. So like that just for Bitcoiners is just like amazing to have a feature like that in a social media client, especially since on Twitter, since it was taken over by Elon, and Elon seems to be more into Dogecoin and things like that. And people, so it makes a lot of the Bitcoiners uncomfortable about being there. So they have a place where they can go and like send Bitcoin to people and spread the word on Bitcoin. So I think that's why a lot of Bitcoiners are there.
Do you see that kind of the philosophy in which you're building this protocol on, which you're building Damus on, is too far out of the spectrum of what most people really care about? The idea that, most people don't care that we're being suppressed, or they don't care that Instagram might shut them down because they're just posting pictures of their cat, or they don't care that the trucker convoy was shut down by the government. There's a lot of people that think that was a good thing. Do you think that is an inhibitor to you?
No, because like even if you don't care about freedom and sovereignty in the digital world, you can still take advantage of the features that Nostr provides. This idea of having your account shared between all these different apps is already pretty cool, and you don't really have to care about censorship resistance or freedom to get in to make use of that. So I think it's just going to be, we're just building on a solid foundation. The people who care about that foundation are happy it's there, but you don't need to think about it to get advantage of the other features.
Yeah, amazing. Are you seeing, obviously being an early Bitcoiner is helpful to you. Are you seeing opportunities, or are you speaking at Bitcoin conferences and promoting the platform in those types of circles?
Yeah, so the past year I probably went to like 8 different Bitcoin conferences.
Yeah.
And actually one main stage which was interesting. So at Bitcoin Amsterdam, I was able to speak on the main stage about Nostr, and people like Julian Assange's wife and Stella, I think her name is Stella Assange. So she was putting up Damus on the main screen at Bitcoin Amsterdam. I was like, whoa. This is crazy. And Edward Snowden, obviously he's a huge user of Nostr as well. So it's cool to have these people. And so I'm just spreading the word at all the conferences, and people are slowly starting to learn about it. And, but I'm hoping to get to other conferences as well. I went to one in Spain, which is more about decentralized, like internet stuff, talking about Nostr. So it's bigger than Bitcoin. I want to probably go to more non-Bitcoin conferences next year.
You throw around just the most outrageous names, like Julian Assange and, no big deal. He's just using the platform, or, you know, or Edward Snowden's wife. You said Edward Snowden's wife or Assange's wife?
Assange's wife and Edward Snowden as well.
I mean, goodness sakes, this is absolutely remarkable.
I'm like debugging Edward's, like he is having relay issues, and I'm like, okay, I'll fix that for you.
What, he gets your personal attention?
I guess like Jack was like, talk to Will because he can help you with your Tor relay issues. I'm like, okay, I'll help him.
What does this feel like as a young man from Vancouver? You know, have an idea and to build something that people like Assange and Jack Dorsey and like that you're getting attention from people who are really important figures in society that have bought into the vision of something that you've created single-handedly. It's remarkable. What does that feel like?
It's just kind of surreal because my partner always gives me hell because I have like 1,000 side projects every weekend. And she's like, okay, finally. She's like, oh, it's like, this was just another side project. Oh, great. You're doing something crazy. So I think it's just one of the things that stuck and people are really interested in it. And yeah, for me, it's just so surreal because I would have never expected this to be so get to see so many people excited about it. So it's very humbling. It makes me just excited to work on it and keep building because people obviously care. So
how much time do you spend working?
I guess if I didn't have a kid, it would be 100% of the time. But no, having a 7-year-old, it's definitely knocked it down to like 96% of my time. I should probably spend more time with my kid. Actually, this year has been insane for me, just building stuff.
Well, yeah. No kidding. That is absolutely remarkable. I mean, it's super exciting to see, I mean, for me, it's super exciting to chat with you because to see someone who's building something that's really shifting the landscape of social media, which is a polluted landscape full of peril and problems and something that has caused a lot of social issues in society and that has allowed powerful people, whether they're centralized governments or companies, to control and dictate a lot of what we do and how we think. And I've got kids as well, the same age as you, and I worry for them what the future looks like. And I think about how can I keep them off of smartphones and devices, and I can't. And so, but knowing that someone's out there is building something that could put them in an area where they can hear the truth, where they can find out what the real news or information is without some kind of centralized authority dictating what they should think, I think is so powerful. Is that a driving force for you?
Absolutely. What we saw with like the whole Twitter files on Twitter, like in some sense, what social media has become is just like information weapons that the governments are using on their citizens, and they're swaying elections. And so we need to take back free speech, like, at least on the digital realm. That's where I'm comfortable at. It's like online. Obviously, in meet space is a lot harder. So just be able to build tools that empowers like freedom and individual sovereignty and it's gonna be pretty important, I think, in the future with elections, because now it's like they can't censor certain people if they don't like their opinion, if it goes against the mainstream opinion. So,
what's the motivation with Jack Dorsey? Do you have any insight as to he built Twitter and then he's kind of going back now into the same space, looking back regretfully, maybe thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done it that way? You think that's part of it?
Well, Jack invited me to stay at his house for like 2 weeks in Costa Rica. So I got to talk to him a lot about like, what's motivating him and all this stuff. And he just really regrets. The biggest thing he said was making it a company. And the minute he did that and he became beholden to shareholders, he just lost control. And he realized that if you want to do this right, it has to be an open, decentralized network. So yeah, I think he definitely regrets the way that it went, and he just told me that he lost control of the ship in some sense, right? So
wow, that is absolutely remarkable. And what's Jack's house like? That's a joke. You don't need to answer that.
It's ridiculously. It's nice.
I'm sure it is. That's pretty cool to hear from someone who really was part of forming social media as we know it today, and holds some responsibility as to how things go. And it's interesting to kind of hear that perspective. So what do you view as some of the biggest social challenges that we're going to face in the future that you are looking to address? Is freedom of speech the most important thing to you? Is censorship the most important thing? Like, what is the big social issue you're like, I'm going to try to make a dent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never really thought about that in that aspect, because I'm just trying to build the best tool and the best tools for like free speech online. And it's like what are the long-term implications of that? I'm not really sure. Like, will people adopt that and embrace it, or people just ignore it? I hope people will see that, like, wow, this is a valuable tool,
right?
And adopt it, and hopefully that will have a positive impact on the world. But yeah, but my main focus is just building the best tool, and hopefully then the results of that will fall from that. But I wouldn't say like it motivates me as like my main motivator. In some sense, it is my main motivator, but I don't know. I just think it's really cool tech.
I love that. Do you believe in anything other than Bitcoin as far as a cryptocurrency perspective? Or are you in that sense a Bitcoin maxi?
I would definitely say I'm a Bitcoin maxi, just because I only have so much time in the day, and I realize that we have one shot at fixing the money in the world, and just going back and seeing what all the scams that went happened in like 2016, 2017, it made me. I saw so many of my friends losing their money and just getting scammed. And for me, it's just like, I just want to focus on Bitcoin because I think this is our chance to fix the money, and everything else to me is kind of like a distraction. So yeah, in that sense, I'm a Bitcoin maxi. So yeah.
When you say you saw friends losing money, this is like Quadrita CX collapsing, or not collapsing, being rugged, that type of stuff?
More just people getting into altcoin trading.
Oh, I see.
And then just like really, really high risk stuff where I'm like, just buy Bitcoin, hold it. You don't need to try to leverage stuff. And so yeah, I'm very much a purist and simplest. I don't like. I'm sure there's some really good ideas in that space. It's just I don't really focus on them.
Yeah, I mean, you seem very laser focused in your approach, which I think has been obviously related to your success. Is that you have a vision of what you want to do, and you're obviously very good at focusing on that and building that.
If I was more into trading like collectibles and stuff, I'm sure I'd be into NFTs and things like that. But I was never really someone who was interested in collecting things.
You didn't have hockey cards and Pokemon cards and
no.
Yeah.
But I think I don't think Bitcoin obviously doesn't serve those set use cases. So yeah, maybe that's why I've never really been into it.
I've got one last question for you. Did having a child change the way or shift in how you view the company that you're building?
The biggest thing for having a kid is just realizing that your time is so short. And it's definitely made me really much more focused, because I realized that I don't have that much time on this earth, and I want to spend more time with my kid and things like that. So I think before I feel like I just kind of wasted a lot of time as a child, as in my teens and in my early 20s. But ever since having a kid, I've just been laser focused and just making sure I'm very efficient with my time so I can spend more time with my kid. Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. You are one of the most interesting people I think I've ever met. I've only met 5 people, so that's not that big of a compliment. I mean, what you're doing is brilliant and I love it. I think it's just absolutely fascinating to hear your perspective on what you're building. Your laser focus is something to be admired and respected. You've got a fabulous reputation in this city for doing what you're doing. And so at least I hope you leave here being encouraged, because what you're doing is pretty awesome. And I really appreciate you coming in and spending a bit of time with me today.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.